Good evening, Patriots. It's great to be here. You know, one of the reasons I have this strange name, Yaron, everybody mispronounces it, is because unlike most of you, I was not lucky enough to be born in this country. I am an immigrant to this greatest nation on earth. I was born in Israel, you know, not a bad place. Served in the Israeli military. But from a young age, I figured, you know, you only live once. You got to make the most of your life. Where are you going to go? What you going to do? And it became evident pretty early that if you want to make the most of your life, if you want to live the best life that you can live, if you want to be as free as possible in the world that we live in today, America was the place to come to. Because in spite of everything, this is the greatest place on earth to live. And many of you guys, and what you're doing, I think is testament to that fact. You know, sometimes it takes a foreigner to come in and say, how are you letting this slip away? You know, because I've been around the world, I've obviously lived in other places that don't have quite the American system. They don't have the values that this country has, and don't have the spirit that Americans have. It is the most precious thing on the planet, and yet we are letting it slip away. Good. Stop it, to stop the slippage, if you will, to reverse course, to return this country to its true greatness, to the true potential that it has, to what I wish I could have come to rather than what I actually came to. A lot of work needs to be done. Now, we have taken the name of the Tea Parties. But what were the Tea Parties? Have we earned the right to use the term Tea Party? Because the Tea Parties launched a revolution, a real revolution, a fundamental revolution. They changed the world as it existed in the 18th century. They didn't say, we just want a little bit less taxes, please, King George. They didn't say, give us some liberty, please, King George. They changed the world because they asked a fundamental question. And the question they asked is, who does your life, does my life belong to? That's a question that people have never asked, because it was always obvious. Your life belongs to the state, to the king, to some emperor, to somebody else. And it's your job to do his bidding. The founders of this country said no. Sovereignty belongs with the individual. My life is mine. Your life is yours. And nobody can take that away. Not a king, but not even a majority. You know, it's very unpopular for me to say this. It's very unpopular to say this generally, and I speak a lot on campuses, and I get booed when I say this. But this country is not a democracy. This country places the individual and his rights above what 51% of the people think. I don't care if 51% of the people want to steal my money to give to somebody for health care. It's wrong. It's morally wrong, and according to the Constitution and the Declaration of this country, it is wrong. The Founding Fathers founded this country on this simple principle, that we own our own lives, that our lives are ours to do with as we choose, as long as we don't hurt anybody else, as long as we're not pickpocketing somebody else's wallet, as Jefferson would say. We should be left free. That's what freedom means. That's what liberty means. It means do with your life what you think is rationally good for you. We have moved a long way from that principle. And what do they call that principle? It's interesting that this principle, which I think is the key principle that defines this country, is almost non-existent in the political debate that we exist. It's in our Declaration of Independence. It's called individual rights. Now, individual rights don't mean that you have the right to somebody else's stuff. Individual rights don't mean that you have a right for a doctor to treat you no matter what. Individual rights mean that you have a right to be left free of coercion. You have a right left to be free to make your own choices, to do what's right for your own life, to pursue, in the words of the Declaration, your own happiness. It's not the right to stuff, as the left would interpret it today. There is no right to health care. There is no right to a job. There is no right to minimum wage. There is no right to a living wage. There's the right to your life, which means to go out there and live. That's it. If we are going to defend this country, if we are going to reverse the trends that this country is moving along, we have to rediscover this concept of individual rights. It is the key concept this movement should be pushing for. It encapsulates everything that's involved. You know, we talk about limited government, right? It's in every Tea Party has a list of the things that fall, and one of the top ones is limited government. Limited by what? How do we decide if this belongs in government or should be done by private sector? How do we decide? By vote? Are we back to democracy again? But how did the Constitution come up with this? Because we need to understand the principle. Because we can't just say there's a document here which is interpreted in many different ways today. But what is the principle behind the document? What is the principle that says this is what government should do, this is what government shouldn't do? What were the founders thinking when they formulated the Constitution? The principle was that government was constituted among men to do one thing and one thing only. And that's to protect your inalienable right to life, liberty, property, and the pursuit of happiness. That's it. Now it's easy. It's easy. You know, Paul Ryan and these guys are having a hard time with the budget, right? It's a budget of $3.7 trillion, that's a T, dollars. I won't tell you how many zeros that is because it's mind-boggling. $3.7 trillion, a deficit of $1.7 trillion. Our brave Republicans have proposed cutting $30 billion. And then you guys complained, so they went back, and now they're going to cut $70 billion. Out of $3.7 trillion? Because they don't know where to start. They don't have a principle. But if you think about individual rights as the principle, then it's easy. It's easy. Does this program protect individual rights? Well, 90% of what the government does today, well, maybe I'm exaggerating, maybe it's 85%, does individual rights. It's easy, and therefore the government shouldn't be doing it. It shouldn't be doing it. Whose rights are being protected when we subsidize farmers? When we take money from some people and give it to, I don't know, the group that lobbied the most at Congress. No rights, indeed, rights are being violated. Individual rights are being violated when we do that. The people whose money is being taken away from them, and the industries that we're not subsidizing, the farmers that we're not subsidizing. Whose rights are being protected with the entitlements? And I know you're not supposed to talk about Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security. But whose rights are being protected when we have under Social Security? I'll tell you who's benefiting from it. Social Security is one of the most immoral schemes invented by a politician. Because, why is it immoral? Because who gets rewarded and who gets penalized? In Social Security, if you're responsible, if you would have saved, if you would have put money aside every day in a saving account at a bank, you are suffering under Social Security because you're getting a much lower return than you would have from the bank. But if you had been irresponsible, if you had spent all your money on frivolous whatever, if you had saved zero, you get rewarded by Social Security. And yet nobody's willing to talk about this. And whose rights are being protected? They're being violated again. We're sacrificing the responsible for the benefit of the irresponsible. Now, granted, phasing out Social Security is not going to be easy. It's going to take a little bit of time. But look, we need to stand on principle. We need to define those principles, believe in those principles, and stand and commit to those principles. We started with the Tea Party. The Tea Party started a revolution against the mightiest military empire of all time. The Founding Fathers, when they signed the Declaration of Independence, staked their life, their honor, and all their material possessions because they knew that if they lost, which was likely, very likely, they would be killed, they would be hung by the English, their property would be burnt, their kids would be imprisoned or kicked out of the country. They staked everything that they owned on principle to fight the mightiest military empire of the time. And our job's easy. So let's take some of that courage that the founders had. Let's, internalize that courage. Let's think about what must have gone through their minds as they were fighting. And what were they fighting for? They were fighting for freedom. They were fighting for liberty. They were fighting for the sovereignty of the individual. They were fighting for individual rights. When Patrick Henry says, "Give me liberty or give me death," he means it. He means it. He is going to fight for that liberty. Do we mean it? Are we willing to fight on principle? Are we willing to fight on principle for real liberty? Are we willing to go and not compromise and not accept the middle road and not accept the mealy-mouthed politicians? Are we going to push them to actually move us not towards fiscal responsibility? Fiscal responsibility is an awful term because you could raise taxes and get us to balanced budgets. We need to cut government so it only does one thing. One thing. I'll just end with this. The greatest document, in my view, the greatest political document in human history is not the Constitution. It's actually the Declaration of Independence. And in that Declaration of Independence is the framework for what this country should and could be. Let us fight. Let us commit ourselves today and every day to fight for those words that those brave founding fathers signed at the bottom. Let us fight for the inalienable right of each one of us and each American and each human being on the planet to the right, inalienable right, can't be taken away, right? To his own life, his own liberty, and in the most self-interested, I think the most radical political statement in human history, let's fight for our right to pursue our happiness the way we choose to. Thank you all. Thank you.